All right, Kelsey, thank you so much for being here today with us at Voters Organized to Educate. I'd love to just start getting to know you a little bit more. So tell us why you're running for who you are and why you're running for District C.
Yeah, my name's Kelsey Foster, and I am running for New Orleans City Council District C. I have been a community advocate, a neighborhood president, economic development director in District C for about 15 years. So I've been doing public policy work across a lot of different sectors for most of my career here in New Orleans, and I really love what I do. And I'm running because I think right now we're at a really pivotal point in our city. We've seen some of the largest population loss of any city in the United States in the last 4 or 5 years, because I think we've got a cost of living that is just too high for a quality of life that is just really too low. I, in addition to being a policy advocate, have been running a nonprofit for the last 5 years, and so at my heart and soul, I am an administrator. I have a MPA, and I really love learning how systems work and how processes work and how we make those better. And so I'm running because I think I've got a lot of the skill sets and the experience, both in policy and process, that we need to make this place run in the way that our people deserve.
That's a really great, and I appreciate your experience. I live in Algiers, and so I'm familiar with some of your work. But I also know, as a resident of Algiers and the work I do here for Vote, that Algiers from the point all the way to the cutoff is very, very different. Algiers in the French Quarter, the river separates us, and our issues are not the same. So what are some shared values that you think you bring to the table for us as a community in C?
Yeah, District C is exceptional in a lot of ways. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but I think that it's a district that really suffers from inequity, and I mean generations of inequity. You have the extreme wealth of English term in the French Quarter, kind of compared and contrasted with even the lived experiences of the people working in the French Quarter or people living in the cutoff, who have been there for generations. And I saw a lot of that as the executive director of the Algiers Economic Development Foundation for a long time. AEDF is a 30, maybe 2-year-old now organization. So it's been around since, the 90s, and for a lot of those years really only served, maybe different groups at different times, but historically really just Algiers Point, which is one of the wealthiest, whitest communities within a majority minority neighborhood. And so my role as I took over as executive director was to try to bring a lot of equity, but really I think starting with geographic equity to the job. And so we hosted meet and greets on Cable Drive, a place that I think a lot of New Orleanians maybe have never been, but has this. It's an entirely we have the 800 block of Newton Street and Cable Drive are almost entirely minority-owned business commercial corridors, and what an amazing kind of mirror of New Orleans and our small business community. And so worked with them to bring in funding during COVID to make sure they could stay in business and pay their employees, especially as we saw a lot of businesses, small businesses of color, denied PPP loans or EIDL support. We got really good at connecting resources to people and kind of became almost a concierge service for a small business, kind of maybe a mix of concierge of services, bringing resources across the river to our people, but also sometimes maybe just a shoulder to lean on a little bit, because entrepreneurship is hard and lonely.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you for that.
Hello, Kelsey. Hi. I am Lydia. I also live in District C, so happy to interview you. I want to talk a little bit about utilities, bills, and resilience. You've favored tougher oversight, regular utility leadership meetings with DPW, and extra financial reports from Entergy, plus storm-hardened infrastructure and community lighthouses. What near-term accountability tools will you use with Entergy and Sewage and Water Board? And what will one bill relief resilience deliverable will you bring to District C?
Yeah, so my background in a lot of ways really has always focused on public finance. So for many years, I ran a campaign at an organization called the Committee for a Better New Orleans, where we kind of worked with community groups and advocacy groups to teach the city budget. We actually even for a while there were teaching incoming city councilors how to read the budget, what it means, and where funding lives and comes from and goes. And I think one thing that I'm really hopeful that that skill set will bring for me as a council person is better financial oversight of particularly Entergy. As the regulator, the city council has a big role to play here. We approve rate increases, and that is incredibly important in a city that has some of the highest rates of utility burden on our people of any city in the country. It is not lost on me that currently council only reviews quarterly shareholder reports from Entergy as a way to make that financial decision. So whether or not we're raising rates on people is really just down to the same information financially that maybe anyone or shareholder would get. I want to review regular financial statements. I want to review Entergy's audit. I want to know actually what's going on and whether or not we need to be raising rates, because my guess is we probably don't. And as far as sewage and water board and kind of the more utilities facing, or I guess kind of infrastructure facing utilities, I think we saw at the Super Bowl what we are capable of. We saw what we can do when we've got to clean up for company. And I think we can keep that going, right? We can keep meeting regularly. I think really what we saw was not anything that groundbreaking. It wasn't even the funding that got it done as much as just the consistent and regular collaboration of all stakeholders at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
So let's talk about short-term rentals for a second, which is a hot topic in Algiers Point and in the Quitter. So one of the things that I think you've been talking about in terms of short-term rentals is enforcement of the laws that are already on the books, limiting corporate short-term rentals, and also creating affordable housing units. So my first part of my question is, what's your plan for the very first year in terms of enforcement, and what would that timeline look like if you know?
I think that one thing this new council can look forward to as a pretty major first action is the review of the corporate short-term rental study that's out right now. So there's a third party that the city is contracted to review the current processes, kind of the current impacts of corporate short-term rentals, and then making some proposals about what they think we should do going forward. I'm going to be a hard sell on the allowance of any corporate short-term rentals. I hear the argument that, our people need these to pay their mortgages. And I do, I'm running a cost of living campaign. I understand. But what I have a hard time swallowing is the idea that one of the major drivers of our unaffordability crisis is something we need to now tolerate in order to survive our affordability crisis, right? It's kind of like this feels like a really chicken and egg argument to me. I also think corporate short-term rentals in particular versus something that might exist in a residential short-term rental is a place where we really see just a lot of big money and out-of-state investors making their money versus our local moms and pops. And so I certainly want to see the study. I am a data-driven girl, but it is a really easy win for me to get units back into the market for our own people and our own families, especially in major downtown areas that are next to jobs, and particularly next to some of our service industry jobs, where we know our people are commuting in farther and farther as the cost of living goes up and up.
Great. So to that point around, creating more affordable housing, do you support a citywide rental registry to make sure that becomes a reality?
Yes, I absolutely support so the Healthy Homes Ordinance that has created a rental registry across the city for landlords. I think we've got a little more work to do to make it really functional. I think on the renter side, I'd like to see some whistleblower protections. Right now, it's really incumbent on a renter to file a complaint against their landlord for the city to come in and inspect that unit. And that's a really tough place to put someone. I've been a renter. I've been a renter who had a hard time making rent. And I think it's a really tough proposition to make someone in that position file a complaint to make sure that they're getting the quality of life they deserve. I have also supported the use of some of the Healthy Homes, the Housing Trust Fund money to be used to help our small landlords. So people who are just renting out the other side of their shotgun, right? Not our multifamily, large scale folks, but our local folks who really do just need a little help, maybe making an upgrade or two. I think we can help them make that happen so that they can be compliant, their renters can have a higher quality of life, and we can start off strong with a program that's going to work for everyone.
Thank you.
I want to move us over a little bit to talking about the jail and your oversight plans for that, kind of the transparency of that process and also the care. So I have kind of two questions, but my first one is you've called for a public health open data portal for jail finances, fully funding MAT, and an oversight board that would include people with lived experience. What KPIs and penalties will you require of the medical contractor?
Yeah, I think that city contracts are something that have been in the news a lot lately, and the way that we are managing or not managing, especially across branches of government. So we've seen this play out with the kind of the trash wars of the French Quarter between the mayor and council. And I think that as a council person and as someone who's overseen public contracts before as a levy commissioner on the West Bank, those processes should be clear, right? And they should be dictated early in that process, so the medical contractor should know exactly when reviews will happen, on what frequency. We need to set those guidelines together, and I think particularly making sure people with that lived experience are telling us, like, hey, what I want to see, what didn't work for me is X, Y, and Z, and we've got to build this into our KPIs, right? Communicating that to a contractor, providing especially something as personal and important as healthcare. And then following that regular check-in schedule and building out a fine and fee structure that demands accountability.
Yeah, thank you. The health outcomes of people coming out of incarceration are historically lower than any other group. And one of those issues that we really focus on in our organization is that continuation of care. How will you ensure that continuation of care at release?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, there's so many difficult bridges to cross for folks coming home. It's a time when you are trying to kind of reassemble a life after so much, has been taken and time has moved potentially in some pretty major ways. And so while I think we talk a lot about connection to jobs for people reentering, I don't think we talk really at all about healthcare. And we know in the United States, healthcare is already something that is such a kind of privatized monster. And it can be so hard to access for even someone with an employer plan. So imagine, right, somebody who is just trying to fill in these gaps. So I think making sure that we are connecting with the people doing the work already, supporting them, both in policy and financially, I think is really important. Putting our money where our mouths is as a city is going to be pretty crucial, because what I don't believe in is reinventing the wheel. I know that we have people in the city that do amazing work, and I know as someone who's been an advocate for a long time, what they need is the platform, the support, and the funding to do the work that they know how to do.
Thank you.
Great. So you were talking earlier in Lydia's question around, trash. And so there are basic quality of life things that, there has been a lot of issues in the news with keeping trash moving. There is lighting sidewalks. There's been a whole lot of effort. My son has disability, so I appreciate the work that's being done so that he can take his walker from one side to the other. But I'm curious, there's also the ferry, right? I'm a big fan of the ferry. It's really easy for us to go over, and also lots of workers rely on the ferry to get to work back and forth. And so how would you kind of describe your 90-day plan for both sides of the river in terms of those services and what you'd like to see happen?
Just kind of quality of life, infrastructure improvements.
Yeah.
The city is considering, will be putting a bond issuance on this ballot as well in the fall, and that's going to be a pretty major way for us to move forward with some of these big projects we didn't get done under IJA and ARPA coming out of COVID. I think it's going to be a tough sell for New Orleanians who are not feeling incredibly trustful of government right now for a number of reasons. And so barring, I think we've got to see what happens with this millage. I personally, our infrastructure problems are real and they do cost money. But I want to stress again that what we saw with the Super Bowl really was that efficiency can move us forward. Efficiency and focus can move us forward. A less hostile approach to partnership from state government can also do a lot for us, right? When Governor Landry wanted to help us get ready for the Super Bowl, we got ready for the Super Bowl. And so while I get it's going to be a delicate balance of local and state for the next few years. In a lot of ways, policy-wise, I do think we've got to come to an understanding of what's best for us as a city and what's best and how that can really translate to being best for us as a state. I do also want to focus, I think, on, again, District C being an incredibly diverse district, the parts of the district that have seen the least investment over time because, my street and the streets in the cutoff are not created equal. And I knocked doors on an actual dirt road last weekend. So it is true, we've got everything from kind of the French Quarter to the historic neighborhoods of Marigny, Bywater, Algiers Point, to suburban Algiers, to rural. Yeah. We've really, it's country out there on Lower Coast.
Got horses.
And we've got to make sure that we're building the infrastructure that each community needs in the order that they need it.
And one of I think a great way, to your point around communities feeling unheard or unsupported, information is really important to community and building trust within government. And so one way to do that is in transparency. A lot of folks, when they're running for office, say they're going to be transparent. What's your plan for, would you support kind of public information in terms of public dashboards, contractor scorecards, right? Because we see what we see on the news, but we might know for anything. When you're making a choice to purchase something, if you want to buy a car, you want to know what is the consumer report on that, right? Did they do well? Did they not? And I think for contractors, for all of those support services, we just hear the bickering back and forth, right? And so even with sanitation or anything, do you support putting more of that public information out and available to communities so that they can engage more?
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of, I think accountability and transparency are something every single New Orleanian would rank pretty high, I think, on what is important to them at the ballot box list. And it is also, I think, in a lot of the functional implementation ways, so unglamorous. It's it truly is the unsexy work of government, but it is you want to vote for an administrator, you want to vote for a nerd, right? These are the people who get it done in a systematic way that outlives you as an elected official. And that's what I'm really passionate about. My work in the city budget previously showed me a lot of what was missing when we started this work in maybe the 2012, 2013-ish era, the 2010s. The only way to see the city budget was to go down to City Hall and ask for it, and they would hand you an 800-page book of spreadsheets. Yep. Wild. So we spent a lot of intern time kind of plugging that into the kind of the first budget dashboard that ever existed. We've got better tools now, and we still have a long way to go. Part of that, and part of what I would like to see across all, so this is a big lift that does not just include budget data, but does include kind of service dashboards, project status, is a centralization of a lot of city information. I think the average resident would be really shocked at how decentralized the work of government in New Orleans is, and how little even interdepartments in the administration speak to each other sometimes. It was a major audit finding for the city of New Orleans right up until a couple of years ago that we weren't using real accounting software. It was kind of an every man for himself Excel spreadsheet situation. And we know, for example, right, the sheriff's budget is still kind of an outside and separate entity that doesn't get tracked, reviewed, and reported in the same way. And so it's really hard for me as someone who really loves to make these, right, I keep saying I like to make a data-driven decision. How can I do that without the data that I need across all kind of even across all platforms? And so one thing I'd really like to do, and this extends even into my work as an economic development director, bringing in safety and permits, bringing in the systems of revenue that are collecting your sales taxes, and really consolidating that down into one beautiful, clean, simple system is going to make it easier for civil servants who are doing this, again, unsexy work every day. Yeah. And it's going to be easier for us as residents to figure out what's going on and where we need to push.
Great, thank you for that.
I'm going to switch us back over to second chances and reentry. And that's something we have on, second chance, something we have on the ballot October 11th. Well, you'll be as well. But you've said you support expanding the Opportunity Pass concept to returning residents. lifting up reentry orgs, and strengthening Ban the Box. What hiring targets will you set for the city department and vendors?
Yep. So can start with Opportunity Pass real quick because it's something I'm pretty passionate about as a public transit kind of girl. So if you're not familiar, Opportunity Pass is a program that the city funded this year, maybe last year, to make all transit free for all youth, I believe ages 22 and under. That really makes it so much easier for young people to get to school, to work, to their first jobs, to get started. It's one less thing to worry about in your incredibly stressed budget. And I think that extending that out to folks who are returning home is a really low cost way because our public transit system is fairly affordable. But it's just something we can do to show people that we're investing in them and investing in getting them where they need to go. As far as Ban the Box, I think that one thing I'm really passionate about and where we have a platform as potential city councilors is in lifting up the private businesses that are doing good. We can require city contracts, we can require City Hall to ban the box, and that's kind of where our control stops. After that, it really is up to, the private businesses individually to make the right choice and to do the right thing. And we know that when left to doing the right thing, money doesn't often go that direction. So when we do see a private business banning the box and making that a proud stance, we need to lift that up and highlight that as a city. Show that as a role model to others because sometimes that leadership is what it takes to get an entire industry on board. Showing how that works, showing what that can do for your business, right? Not just as a value being lived, but as an actual, this is a way that you can bring on an entire workforce that is going to work hard for you and watch it thrive and succeed, I think is an important thing for us to showcase across the city. And the same goes, I think, lifting up those businesses, making good value kind of actions and good faith steps in things like providing healthcare benefits, right? Small, locally owned businesses. I have a friend who owns a sandwich shop in the French Quarter and as a matter of principle provides healthcare for every employee that he has. And if he goes out of business because he can't afford to do that, then he doesn't want to be in the business. And so I think it's really important to find those folks and make sure that they're celebrated because it's not a choice that they have to make. It's a choice they often don't make. And when we do, let's make sure they're the hero.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to move us on. We talked a little bit about access for youth to buses. This is an issue near and dear to my heart. Have been a juvenile public defender, and I really understand that when young people don't feel seen, heard, or valued, right, and don't have opportunities for activities in their communities, they often end up in the justice system. I'm also the mom of a disabled son. I have a 14-year-old as well. NORD kind of starts and stops. And so you've kind of talked about participatory budgeting, right? Which I love because young people have a lot to say about like what they want and what they need. And I often find that adults are the ones talking and not listening to the kids, or kids aren't engaged at city council or saying this is what I need. And so, you've kind of talked about young people participating so they can say, this is how I would like to see NORD funds used, and also youth jobs with dignity. So what are 3 deliverables that young people, both in Algiers and the French Quarter, can kind of expect from you by next summer? Like, how will you recruit? How will you engage them? I'm really curious.
Yeah, so participatory budgeting is like the thing I get just really excited about. When I was doing budget work at the Committee for Better New Orleans, we advocated for this policy kind of after Katrina for a long time because we thought it could be a way to really engage people in the recovery process that was feeling really kind of like something being done to us and not with us. Mm-hmm. So to explain it kind of briefly, participatory budgeting is something that started in Brazil in the 1980s and has moved across the United States in about the last decade. There are pilots in southern cities, I believe Dallas, San Antonio, and Atlanta. Nashville maybe are kind of the big programs we've seen in cities that would be analogs to us here in New Orleans. But we take some small portion of a city budget, usually no more than 1%. And we turn it over to the people for direct democracy. So residents directly get to propose ideas, put them on a ballot, and vote on them. And what's really beautiful about this process is that almost never does it go through a formal kind of registrar of voters process. And so it becomes a much more inclusive way to do democracy, where young people, people returning home, people on parole can participate, immigrants can participate, people who live in neighborhoods and don't get that voice at the ballot box in a traditional sense get to chip in. And so what I've proposed in my platform is a pilot of a participatory budgeting process at NORD. So taking a small piece of NORD's budget and turning it over to specifically youth and letting them propose some ideas and vote on them. I know I've gotten to watch this in action in Phoenix, Arizona, at a high school that did a pilot where they gave, I think, $100,000 to the student body, and the youth were allowed to kind of come in and do this process. And in the process, they registered every high school senior. They brought in the voting machines from the county. So while, again, this isn't like a formal registrar of voters thing, the youth were able to actually touch a voting machine before they turned 18. They got to flex that muscle of voting, of democracy, and then have an immediate payoff where, like, I think one of the things they voted for was healthier snacks in their vending machines. And so within like a month, there were healthier snacks in the vending. So there's this immediate payoff for the kids who participated, who said, you know, I pushed this button in this weird little booth and now I get better snacks. And like as a teen, that would have pretty much sold me on democracy on day one. I'm very snacks driven. So I think that as someone who's worked with youth a lot in the city, particularly in Algiers, I'm really kind of heartbroken at the number of, I ran a pilot program for high school juniors and seniors in workforce development for the last 5 years, and almost none of them were registered to vote. Very few, what I'll say is very few could name maybe their city councilman, definitely, you know, state rep, state senator, those kind of elected positions. But what I would also say is that the ability to know and name those people was really uneven by school. So we know kids don't go to neighborhood schools in the city anymore, and so within my program we had just this year 7 different high schools represented. There are some high schools that can pretty consistently tell us who represents them, and some who pretty consistently can't. And I think that uneven nature of education is something that's not probably a new idea for anyone listening right now, but it is something that I think it is just really furthering the divide and the inequity of local government and local democracy. So I would really love to see this participatory budgeting process kind of work for all youth. I do think NORD is kind of like our common thread as an experience for any young person living in this city, and I get really excited when I think about what that could mean.
Great. So just to follow up on that, based on the experience that you've had kind of working with some of the schools, recognizing the inequity of understanding, because most people, especially kids, don't know what they don't know, what would be your plan to kind of recruit and engage, right? Because kids will push you, they will test you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to participate. They also don't want to feel stupid for not knowing, right, who represents them. What would be your strategy for really engaging those young people and getting them involved in this process?
I can tell you, I don't know that this is the answer for a participatory budgeting process, so maybe I'll two-part this, but just to kind of say that in our workforce program at Algiers Economic, one thing we did to really incentivize participation was a scholarship for every attendee. So every student who participated received a $100 scholarship for every Saturday session that they attended. And the idea is, by scholarship, this is not a check being written to Dillard or Xavier, UNO, that most of our students weren't self-identified as not pursuing higher education after high school. That money is kind of, we're going to call it a scholarship, but like that's between you and the Lord. What you do with that is your choice. But we teach on day one financial literacy and how to make smart decisions. And we would have by the end of the program, we'd built some good trust together and, kind of gotten to know each other a little bit better. And we would do an anonymous survey at the end and kind of ask, like, so what'd you ballpark me? Like, what'd you do with that money? How much did you save? If you spent it, how did you spend it? And it was really interesting to see kind of the lessons learned playing out in that scholarship. So usually I would say the most common stories that students saved half, spent half, which is far more responsible than I would have been as a high school junior or senior. And those who did spend money often spent it on things really relevant to getting started in life. So they bought a suit to wear to our mock job interview day, or they bought, sometimes it was really real survival stuff like food. And so I do think that it was important for us to value their time in that way. And we were able to even kind of tie it to like, this is what the real world's gonna be. Your time is valuable, and I see that, and I value you in this way. And you deserve to be compensated in some way, whether it's, even not to say volunteerism isn't important, but value your time as a young person. So that's kind of maybe answer one. I think maybe more directly, I do think that NORD is an organization that does have some community trust. I know, it can be a struggle. It can be a struggle. But it is a place that parents and young people know that they can go and receive recreation. They can receive programming. They can receive something. And that is a very tangible thing in a city that doesn't always deliver services evenly or often. I do think that making sure that while we have these young people doing this hard work of democracy, of like pitching in ideas, of voting, that we're feeding them, that we're connecting to other services, that we have, representatives of employers present to talk about what's a day in the life. One of the most popular field trips we did was a tugboat company. We took them out on a tugboat, which is really cool if you've never been on the river, and talk about how much money you can make working on the river without a college degree. And so the more value add you can give young people, the better. And I think that this generation in particular really gets that.
Yeah, they definitely need the little connections and of inspiration along the way. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Shifting us a little differently. Something that has been really alarming to myself and a lot of other residents is the city's unprecedented use of facial recognition this year. That is completely different from any other city in the U.S. You support banning facial recognition in the city and auditing the RTCC annually, but will you back a moratorium on expansions until guardrails are law?
Yeah. I am the only candidate in this race that fully supports an outright ban of facial recognition software. And I want to kind of differentiate that stance because I don't think you can put guardrails on a system that is inherently racist. And I think we have to say that out loud. It is kind of shocking to me that the repercussion of finding out that we've been using this software against the standards we set for ourselves, right? We said we wouldn't use it like this, and then we did. And now we're just going to legislate in the rules that we've broken internally for ourselves. That doesn't sit right with me. And when I think about the advocacy that I've done in the last 15 years and the ways that we don't trust our city hall, this is it, right? Like, we get to break those rules and then just legislate them. I don't think that is fair. And I don't think that it is setting a good precedent for ourselves. I realize that, again, as the only candidate in this race with that stance, that may not be something that I would be able to deliver as a council person. And so if I am put in a position where I have to legislate this technology that I am deeply uncomfortable with, I want there to be some pretty strong whistleblower language, because if we know we have it and we're using it against the ways we said we would, who's speaking up and what protections do they have? If we have to live with this, and I don't think we should have to, I want to make sure that there are some really robust accountability measures in place for what happens the next time we find out we broke our own rules.
Is the whistleblower policies the first kind of part of that ordinance you'd file first?
Yeah. If it doesn't seem like, right, we got to live in the world we live in. If it doesn't seem like an outright ban is going to make it across the table, then yeah, whistleblower protections are going to be crucial.
Thank you.
Great. Let's kind of continue on the public safety, right? So you've called for community safety, including different things like neighborhood-led safety, which can be a good thing, but that can also be a not good thing. Violence interruption, youth outreach, cross-system collaboration as ways for community to feel safer. What would you actually fund first in that effort, and what outcomes are you expecting them to report?
Yeah, this is one of the more fascinating conversations I think I got to have kind of played out hundreds of times over years as a budget advocate. We had, for many years, had a website where you could kind of play mayor for a day, right? Balance the city budget for yourself. And we would go to senior centers and neighborhood associations and high school classrooms and kind of talk about what a budget means as a moral document and show people, maybe for the first time, what the budget looks like in kind of a visual way. Mm-hmm. Don't show people numbers and don't show them spreadsheets, for the love of God. But one pretty consistent across race, across zip code, across age, across lived experience response that we got from people was just shock at the amount of money that we spend on public safety versus what that feels like. How safe do you feel as a New Orleanian? And so I think that was just kind of this like wild cognitive dissonance that we saw kind of time and time again throughout that game. And so one thing that we would talk about, right, the pivot point there, I think, is the other ways that we invest in public safety that aren't necessarily policing, that aren't necessarily incarceration, because we know that there is absolutely no kind of through line or correlation on number of people incarcerated and the safety of this community. So I have been following a lot the work of the Big Easy Budget Coalition, which obviously is near and dear to my heart. And they have a ask for a $3.5 million investment in kind of prevention and trauma care. In particular, there's a trauma center at University Medical Center that is working with people who have been exposed to violence and making sure that they're getting the resources that they need to recover, to be part of society after witnessing or experiencing some violence. And I don't think that that's something that gets talked about enough in kind of victim services. And so outside of victim services and kind of trauma care, I also think we've got to make sure we are doing our level best to address mental health crises in our city and addiction crises in our city in a non-carceral way. And I want to be super clear and honest as, again, your resident budget nerd, that that's going to be hard in the next 4 years. We have a hostile federal government and a hostile state government, and cuts are coming. And so when we're on the campaign trail and I hear folks talking about these really cool, innovative, new things that they want to do, I want to make sure we are level setting with people in a very real way that likely the conversations we're going to be having as your elected officials is what we can keep. What can we keep now? What survives the cuts? Because they will happen, and they will happen to the people who require and rely on city services the most. And so to me, that is making sure that we are looking at the programs we have now that are serving us well, that are impacting the most people in the biggest way, and that we are, we're clear on what our non-negotiables are.
Great, thank you.
Speaking of community safety and a hostile federal government, something else that has been alarming to our residents is people are seeing their neighbors, their friends be forcibly taken off the streets by ICE. So with state pressure to preempt local policy and force that ICE cooperation, what's your plan to defend the home rule and uphold New Orleans welcome city practices?
Yeah, talk about, yet another reason why facial recognition software has no place in this city. If we can't even keep that technology in the kind of standard use of ourselves internally as a city, how are we ever going to keep that out of the hands of a hostile state or federal government who wants to use it to kidnap and deport, right? That's one of the many reasons I just feel like this just cannot be. I think some other ways that we can try to safeguard ourselves as best as possible, and this is, a hard thing to do, but it's really building community with each other, creating spaces in community where people can gather, people can get information, that we have safe ways to distribute, when and where resources can be obtained in ways that we can really kind of guarantee people the safety of gathering, and making sure that the hosts of these gatherings are aware of their rights as well. I know we have a Hispanic Heritage Festival in Algiers every year. That's a really fun time, and as you know, Kenner has just canceled their annual Hispanic Heritage Festival because of fears of ICE. In Algiers, we are continuing on, but with the very explicit training there will be, kind of training and rights information for everyone involved to make sure that if there is a presence, everyone knows how to respond and keep everyone present safe. It's a really tough question, and I think we have just got to really live our values here.
Thanks.
Great. So earlier you were talking about thinking about the budget, getting prepared for the cuts that are coming, which I think is a really realistic view to have. But when we talk about community safety, I'm hearing you talk about trauma for folks who have experienced violence, whether that's a victim or on the other side. You've talked a lot about, right, the idea around getting help, not handcuffs. And the city has speaking of the big, beautiful budget and all of those things, right? We have a propensity to fund things that lead to carceral care over things that make us happy, healthy, whole, and prosperous, right? Namely, like funding the jail, getting rid of EMS services, getting rid of funding for parks. There's the whole entire list that goes, how are you going to be able to balance the idea of help, not handcuffs, understanding kind of how we are traditionally budgeting, and then have kind of cuts to come? How will we keep 311 services, 911 services? What are your thoughts there?
Oh, y'all, it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be a slog, and so I would say to kind of as someone who's been an advocate, to the advocates listening, elect the people that you can work with, right? Like, you're always kind of trying to elect your most friendly adversary, and so you've got to make sure that you're working with folks whose values are aligned with yours, because we are going to be making value-based budgeting in the next few years. I think making it clear what our non-negotiables are, especially in a systems perspective, is going to be really important. So when I think of a non-negotiable for me in kind of a systems way, that's parity for the public defenders and the DA. A cut to one can't mean an unequal cut to one can't be anything but equal to another. We've seen what that looks like when we have a DA that is funded at like 10 times the rate of a public defender per client. And so I think identifying those kind of big picture ideas is going to be important. And again, I think kind of doing the hard work of being in community with your constituents is going to be necessary, because no one wants to hear that their park just got cut, especially as we're, one thing I think we recognize as a city is that we're really good at building things and really poor at maintaining them or funding programming or maintenance. And so, we just cut the ribbon on a beautiful new pool in Algiers. It's the first pool we've had on the West Bank since Katrina and before. I'm a swimmer, this body don't run. So like, I'm really thrilled to have it, but I can't, there's this part of me in the back of my head that wonders, like, how long will it be this beautiful? And so I want to make sure that, like, if we do have to scale, we're not scaling on quality, because we do deserve city services and programs that are clean and that are functional and that do meet as many of the needs as they can for what's going to be a really limited budget.
Great, thank you.
This is a slightly bonus question, but you're speaking about being in community with your constituents. Like, can you tell us, like, what that would look like for you? Like, how are you going to stay accessible to your district in a way that they can engage with you meaningfully? Yeah,
I think this is a crucial one for a District C representative. We are like the chip on the shoulderest of all people in District C, because Algerians, like, we're just like that all the time about everything. But the East Bank hasn't had a District C representative since the late 80s. And so they feel really unheard too. And that's fair and that's valid. And so a thing that I would really like to see happen, and I think this really actually can be also part of a solution towards the larger federal and state kind of overreach issues we're having, is a codified, a actual ordinance and a law around how we engage people as elected officials. So a kind of formalized community participation plan that doesn't center City Hall, right? We're not going to require people to come down and spend 2 minutes in front of a microphone, but only if it's related to a vote. And you have to read the agenda that is incredibly non-plain English, and you have to pay for parking, and you have to take time out of your workday. It's just not real, and it really limits the voices that we hear. And I think it limits them to people who have just a level of privilege that are not representative of us as a people. I also think that it safeguards us against election cycles, right? I know, because I love this stuff, that I am going to be, of course, the most present District C City Council person ever. But what happens after I term out? What happens if that person doesn't value connection in the same way? So we have to have this standardized, not just for District C, but across districts. And I think we've historically seen some districts that really don't get connected with in the same ways because they're bigger, or they're more less dense, or less kind of cohesive in identity. And so thinking about ways that we help communities engage in district, that we engage people not just by neighborhood association. I was a neighborhood president. I love the work that neighborhood associations can do. But we also know that that's just not really the primary identity of a lot of New Orleanians, right? If you ask someone what groups they're parts of, they're never going to lead with neighborhood association. Or God bless if you do, but it's your social aid and pleasure club, it's your Mardi Gras crew, it's your church. And so there's all of these other kind of civic institutions that we specifically as New Orleanians have. We actually have a really robust civic culture, and we don't leverage that as a government in any way. And I think that is such a loss. There are really beautiful models for this out there. A lot of southern cities actually invested in community participation plans coming out of the civil rights era. So we're behind on this. And we suffer for it.
Thank you. This is our closing, but thank you so much for joining us, Kelsey, and thank you for answering my bonus question.
Yeah, I loved it.
Before we wrap up, what final message would you like to share with the residents of District C? Anything else you want to leave with them?
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of really wonderful experiences working in policy and as an advocate in this city in the last 15 years. I've gotten to learn so much over so many different very righteous fights. Some we've won and some we've lost. And so when I think about the kind of city council person I hope that I can be, it's the kind of city councilor I wish I'd had as an economic development director. When I was trying to build affordable housing and was shot down. I want to be the kind of city council person that I wish I'd had as a neighborhood president when we were trying to build a more accessible ferry terminal on the East and West Banks. Because it's not. I want to be the kind of leader that I wish I'd had as an advocate when I was working with people with the lived experiences of these policies that we're crafting. Because I just don't think that our voices trickle up the way that they should, and I don't think information trickles down nearly as far as it should. So I'm here to bring all of this experience across policy and advocacy to the city council, because this is a really important election. Our people are tired and they deserve so much more.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Thanks. That was fun.